never speak without stuttering, and that's not anything against anybody with a stutter. I mean, it's just because I think he knows how guilty he is of all the different things. Have y'all seen that video of Peter Thiel being asked about how Palantir's AI is helping fund the killing in Gaza from drones? He was confronted, he was speaking, I think it was at Cambridge, and the student union out there organized protests for like hours outside, but then some of them got inside and were able to ask questions, and they asked a question like, how do you feel about your technology being used by the IDF? And and he did that for a few minutes before saying, well, I just defer to what Israel thinks is right, so I won't, kind of giving away who's in charge there. But how many people here are not familiar with my work and got dragged here by a friend and maybe just don't know what you're in for? Awesome. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you very much. I will give you a brief background, and I do want to just send this out to everybody in the room. Like I said earlier, I never come into a room and assuming we're all on the same page about every single topic, and I never think that about even people that I agree on most things. I love the human diversity of opinions and thoughts, so if I say anything tonight at some point that triggers you or makes you feel a certain way, I want to encourage you not to walk out of the room, but to just sit with it and see what we can learn from each other, right? And I just say that because sometimes I just have no filter. So my name is Derrick Broze. I'm 40 years old. I've been an independent journalist and an activist for about 15 years, maybe a little longer than that, but in terms of, I think, really understanding the lie of the two-party system and the false two-party binary, kind of understanding things on a deeper level for about 15 years. And I started getting involved in activism in those post-2008, 2009 financial crisis days. Occupy launched 2011. I started an activist group in Houston called the Houston Freethinkers back in 2010. So kind of in that era, resisting Obama, the drone strikes, the whole thing, the National Defense Authorization Act. A lot of protests, marches, civil disobedience, getting arrested, all these different things. And along the way, kind of fell into journalism. I didn't go to journalism school or ever have the plan of being an independent journalist or any kind of journalist. I just kind of realized through my activism that the media was doing a pretty bad job of reporting on things. At one example, the Houston Freethinkers, we had this big community party at a space like this, and we had all kinds of people and bands, and it was a great time. We raised money. And the cops decided to come show up and ruin everything. They said they were there for a noise complaint, and they showed up with like 10 cars deep. They end up grabbing me, arresting me, pulling a shotgun on a crowd of 100 unarmed people, and we filmed it all. When I got out of jail the next day for resisting arrest, I don't know what I was resisting, but that was the charge. But we collected all this video, we put it out there, put out a press release, and within an hour, all the local media was at my house interviewing me, and it became a big story. And the Houston police officer pulls a shotgun, and HPD investigated themselves, and surprise, surprise, they said they didn't do anything wrong. And the media all showed up, though, at first, and they came to my house, and they were acting super friendly, like, we saw the video, we want to talk to you, and it was on the news that evening. And when all the articles and the videos started to come out, after they came over to my house and acted all friendly, they wrote articles like, local group of conspiracy theorists surround police, and like saying that we were the aggressors, that we were, we're not the ones with a shotgun, but we were somehow the ones causing the problem. And that was like my first taste of maybe the media is not really looking out to inform the people the way I've been believing most of my life, right? And with things like that, I started to just pick up a camera. I started to go to local press conferences for the mayor, for the police chief, and I'm in there with my little handheld camera at the time. Everybody's got all their big cameras from the TV stations, and I realized I was the only one in there that had interest in asking any hard questions, because most of these local people, they want to be invited back. They want to get invited to the dinners and the galas and the exclusive events that happen on the local level. They want to be part of the local crowd, and one time I was asking questions to the chief about a contract they had for surveillance equipment, actually, and the chief lied to me one night saying he didn't know anything about it, but he didn't know that I already had the contracts from an open records request. And so I put out a video saying, Houston Police Department chief lies about this. The next day, there happened to be a press conference, and the chief's little bulldog officer told me, like, can you stay after? I was like, oh no, I'm getting asked to stay after class, like back in high school or something. And he told me, he said, you're welcome here anytime, as long as you're a good journalist and a respectable journalist, you will continue to be asked back. And it's basically kind of giving me a little talk of like, I told him, I said, look, I know this is your job to defend the police department, but it's my job to ask these questions, and I'm not going to call torture enhanced interrogation, and I'm not going to call, because the police, he said the chief didn't lie, he didn't confirm or deny. I said, well, when I have the records and he says he can't confirm or deny, that's a lie to me. Needless to say, I was not invited back to those press conferences, but I started to have experiences like that, and over the years, my work has generally focused on digital surveillance in different ways. And part of this is because with my activism, after a couple of years of doing the Houston Freethinkers and us doing protests, marches, we're also out there just being super radical, building community gardens for people, raising money for various causes. So obviously these things are going to get the attention of the police. And, they started apparently holding training sessions about us, describing us to the cops like we were some militant, dangerous group. And the only reason I know about this is because 2 police officers leaked information to me through another journalist. First, it came in the form of an email saying, if you know Derrick Broze, you should tell him that he has a criminal intelligence officer assigned to him. And at this time, I was pretty much just biking around downtown Houston all the time. So I guess there was some cop assigned to just follow me around everywhere while I'm going from community garden to protest to concert to whatever else we were doing. We were very involved in the art and music community. We were starting to make waves, though. We were starting to make the news, and they were paying attention. And so a couple months later, I was leaked another piece of information. A police officer actually took a picture of a room like this, but on this wall was a projector screen that had my face on it, said the Houston Freethinkers, and you could see a bunch of cops sitting in there like listening to this training session. And one of the cops from the back of the room took a picture. And so after that, I realized, okay, I'm under surveillance, and I tried to go do all the typical things. I went to the city council and the mayor and said, hey, here's this information, somebody do something. And they, once again, said they looked into it and there was nothing to worry about. So I decided, well, look, what does that even mean? I generally understood the principle of being under surveillance. I'm being watched, right? But what does that actually mean? What does that look like on the local level? And so that's when I began to dive into surveillance technology in a number of different ways. I looked at cell site simulators. Has anybody ever heard of stingrays? Yes. So a stingray is a type of cell site simulator. It's basically a little laptop that cops can use. And in the most ideal world, let's say they're looking for a criminal and they know the criminal's in a certain neighborhood. They drive around with this little laptop stingray and they can ping and ping until they locate the phone and then try to track down the criminal. But the way it operates in reality is that in the process of doing that, it's also scooping up the data of every phone that's in that perimeter. It doesn't just isolate and target one phone. It just like goes through and scoop as much data. And you're pretty much up to trusting the police to, destroy it after 30 days or whatever they claim. And even in that case, it's really hard to know because most people don't even know these things exist. So I started looking at cell site simulators. I started looking at heat detection technology, gate detection, voice detection, and of course, we're going to talk about facial recognition technology as well, which is becoming more and more of a concern. So over the years, my work has largely focused on that out of my own experience, and that's why tonight we're going to talk about that and how that's continued to rise. Because unfortunately, Edward Snowden was like 12 years ago, and how many people even paid attention or really cared? I mean, I made the news for a little while, and I know there's questions among some people about whether or not they trust Snowden himself, which is a whole other rabbit hole, but just generally speaking, the idea that this big story that all of us and our internet data and phone traffic, which many people suspected post 9/11, but now it was confirmed. Government agencies are doing this, the NSA and other agencies, the GCHQ in the UK and others. And the average person either says, hey, good to see you. The average person doesn't care or doesn't know, right? So now here we are in 2025 and we're dealing with technology, digital surveillance technology to an advanced level that we haven't seen. Before we get into that, I do want to just provide a little bit more background. Everything that I just shared with you guys started in 2009, 2010. I kind of got into activism after I went to prison at a young age. As I said, I'm 40 years old right now, so 20 years ago in November I got arrested. November 2005 I got arrested. I'd been addicted to crystal meth for about 10 months at that point and homeless and just went through this whole thing, got myself sober, but I was still kind of struggling, and I ended up getting arrested the week before I turned 21. And that was like my first real wake-up experience. This is before I was a conspiracy theorist, if you will, or a conspiracy realist. This is before I knew any of this kind of stuff. Or I generally had kind of like a young punk mentality of like, yeah, fuck the government, I don't trust authority. But I couldn't have told you anything deeper than that. It was just sort of like rebel without a cause type of thing, right? But I got addicted to drugs and I got locked up at 20 years old, and that was really the first waking up for me, right? And as I got locked up, and I don't know how many people have really faced situations like this where you feel truly powerless. Like, imagine just the four walls in this room, we couldn't leave. They shut the door right there, and we're not leaving until somebody else tells us we can. We can no longer use the bathroom in privacy. We can't necessarily eat what we want or go where we want. All these different freedoms that we take for granted on the daily basis, like really feeling that. And for me, I had that feeling, plus also growing up in a family of drug and alcohol addicts. My birth father was in and out of prison my entire life. He actually ended up dying of a drug overdose in 2018 because he struggled with his addiction his whole life. So I remember being a little kid and visiting him in prison. So I'm 20 years old. I get locked up for drugs. I'm like, oh man, I'm going down this same path. I used to call it the family tradition. And because there was just so much drug and alcohol addiction on both sides of my family. And it's like, I know what this looks like. And I remember it very clearly, seeing like there's two paths in front of me. There's like doing what my dad did, and I know what that looks like, and becoming a more hardened criminal, and you can do that when you get locked up if you choose to. Or there's something else over there, and I don't know what that looks like, don't know what that entails, but I think I might want to try that. And so when I got locked up, I literally just started, I think I saved myself from journaling, just from writing my thoughts down. I also was really lucky to have a grandmother who passed away during COVID, not because of any of that, more because of a broken heart and isolation and everything. But she was one of my biggest spiritual influences, and so she started sending me books on like prayer and meditation and Zen Buddhism and things that were really new to me at the time, because I was very much like, I don't want to hear about any of that garbage. And as I started to meditate and I started to journal while I was locked up, I was able to see like, okay, there's this clear path of me being this like sad little angry little kid of where's my dad, and then becoming a teenager, and that anger turned into like getting in trouble. Then I'm getting in fights. Then I'm getting arrested. Then eventually I try alcohol. Then I try drugs. And then I'm locked up. Like, it was such a clear, obvious path that obviously I didn't see it while I was in it. But I could now, with the benefit of hindsight, I could see, wow, this is what I've been doing. This is, now it's time for me to make a choice. Do I want to continue on this path, or do I want to do something different? So I ended up doing 18 months in and out. I did a year first. I got out, lasted 5 months. I played that game for a little while. I was kind of getting sober, pulling myself out of this, changing my friends, and finding like a purpose, essentially. I think I remember being 23 and like the first time I was joyful watching a sunset and just like, wow, okay, so this is what I've been looking for. For a while I thought, okay, the answer is just stick as many drugs up your nose as possible. That's the way you find happiness. That's not the way. Let me tell you. I'll just throw that out there in case there's any confusion about that. So I had to find that like in myself, though, while I was locked up, and really just make that choice. So the reason I share all this is because this greatly influences my journalism and my activism. If you do follow my work, this is something that comes up periodically, and I try to incorporate it, because that was my first real awakening. I get out of prison. I'm a felon in 2008. Then, as I said earlier, 2009, Occupy, there's, post-2008, all this stuff. I start waking up in that way. But it happened kind of on a spiritual, personal level first. And so that's why I call my work, my website, my book series, The Conscious Resistance. To me, that is just the recognition, the understanding that the struggle for a more free and ethical and just world that I think we're all after is not only going to come from confronting government or corporations or Bill Gates or whatever, bad guy you want to place there, the capitalists, whatever names you want to give them, right? Like, that's a piece of the puzzle. But there's also this other part, which is the struggle against our own, what I call the internal tyrant, your doubts, fears, insecurities, limiting beliefs. And I've met a lot of people, been all around this world, and I don't care how big of a person you present yourself are, or how big you are on the internet. Everybody's got those things, and everybody struggles in different ways, and we all deal with them differently. One thing might be really debilitating or kind of paralyzing for one person, and it might be nothing to another, right? And so I didn't have the tools when I was growing up to really process these things, and I went to drugs, and that obviously didn't get me very far. But ultimately it had to happen, I guess, to get to this point. And so I share all that to say that I'm going to talk about physical solutions of how I think we can survive the coming surveillance state, but we shouldn't lose sight that ultimately this is a battle of the mind and the spirit as well. And like I was sharing a few moments ago, if our minds are already colonized or indoctrinated and controlled, then it ultimately won't matter what we do in the physical realm, right? These two things need to go hand in hand, or at least I believe. Does that make sense to you guys? Sweet. Okay. Thanks for letting me share that. Now we're going to, what time are we at right now? Is anybody?
7:07.
Dang, I'm going faster than I thought. Okay, we'll slow it down now. Sorry if I do talk fast. I hear that a lot. I'm trying to not think and talk so fast, but it's hard. So, how do we opt out? This is a question I put a lot of thought into. I was just sharing about my process of getting into surveillance technology, starting to understand those tools. I started to work with local groups, hosting teach-ins about how do you avoid stingrays? How do you avoid these different types of technology? And in 2017, 2018, there started to be different digital rights organizations, as well as lawyers, like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and others, who were starting to warn about AI years before ChatGPT. And I want to make it clear, too, as we go forward, I'm focusing largely, of course, on the concerns. In my mind, AI is mostly a tool. I think it's something unprecedented, so it is something that we maybe need to have some deeper thoughts about. But, you know, I know there's always like, well, yeah, Derrick, but I'm doing all these great things. We accept that. We acknowledge like there's potential use cases, but there's also the worrisome aspects of the different technology. But I don't want it to come across as me being anti-technology. I use technology every day in all of my work. And I do see it as a tool. It's the beauty of the digital tools I have in the internet that allows me to broadcast and meet and connect with people all over the world, right? That's something we've never had. But then at the same time, there's a lot of ways that that's being used against us now. And that data that we've been sharing voluntarily for the last 15, 20 years is now being used to create profiles on us and to, in one ways, to just sell us things, market to us, but in other ways, maybe more nefarious, you know, studying our actions and our behaviors with companies like Palantir as well as government. So I'm not anti-technology by any means, but I am worried about the direction things are headed, and ultimately what I believe the answer is for us each individually and as families and, you know, households to start having the conversation, especially with the younger ones, about how we relate to technology, right? We don't necessarily have to accept every new update to whatever apps you're using. We don't have to hand over for example, the airport today. I'm the only person opting out of facial recognition at the airport, at least for the time I went there. How many people even knew that it's optional? More in this crowd probably than the average person, right? Today I was actually filming a short video at the airport. It's so crazy. When I was walking up to the thing, I'm sitting there watching, waiting in line, and I'm like getting more and more frustrated. I'm like, oh, I got to do something. I'm starting to think of like, how can I organize? What can we do? I'm just like, this is driving me crazy. Nobody even knows that they can opt out. And they've already been trained through like COVID, step right here, stare in the thing. And you know where it says it's optional? On the tablet as you're staring into it. It says this is optional by the point you've already like given them your face over, right? Now that's not to say they don't have our faces in other ways, IDs and things like that, but the point is trying to take a stand where you can, even in small ways, because if there is no resistance or pushback, you can guarantee that the head of the TSA has already said, he said at South by Southwest in Austin last year that this is going to become mandatory. Like they haven't given a date, but it's going to get to that point where it will be mandatory to even get into the airport using your face as some sort of, you know, entry. Like they talk about having the airport of the future where it's completely touchless, contactless, no human. You literally just walk in, and the moment you get out of your car, the airport facial recognition cameras are scanning your face, comparing that to the database to check, cross-reference if you have a ticket, so that nobody that will be in the airport that's not supposed to be there, you know, so they can account. And you won't have to talk to anybody. And the way they're going to sell these things is, of course, it's convenient, it's faster, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to touch any of these scary humans who might have germs, all these kind of things. Like, they're going to sell it to everybody all the different ways they can. And so I've been watching this technology for a bit. And as I said, there was lawyers and other people starting to put out letters and say, we might need to have a moratorium, a temporary ban, or a hold at least, on facial recognition technology. This was back in 2018. And two things on that. Personally, I'm a voluntarist. You know, I'm an anarchist. Somebody said something about regulation. I'm with you. Like, I think the less regulation in most areas, it seems to be better, and keeping government out of our lives. And I'm not necessarily sure trying to regulate AI or facial recognition would even work. But I do think it's a conversation we should be having, because it's such an unprecedented technology that combined together can be used against people, and it can lead to things like we see in parts of China as well as India and other nations that have already adopted this, where they can very easily turn people's bank accounts off, or they can punish people for things they say online. We've already seen some of this during COVID 1984, but as these systems get more interconnected, it is going to be even easier to do these things. Like people saw, they turned off certain people's bank accounts for donating to the Canadian truckers, you know, not only the protests themselves, but anybody who donated to that, right? And why is that? Well, because they're on the traditional banking system. We'll talk about that. Like, this is why, you know, we see these weaknesses. We can identify what they did during COVID, and I think those same tactics will be used again. They'll try to squeeze us financially, try to penalize people socially for not complying. You know, when you build this, what I call technocratic state, using facial recognition, artificial intelligence, social credit scores, things like that, you don't have to have a gun to the head of a person anymore like it had to be done in previous totalitarian regimes. The gun, quote unquote, is the digital technology. It's a soft and a subtle way to socially engineer people to comply with what you want. And that, I think, is more nefarious, because people don't feel the threat. They don't see it. They're just like, oh, I'm just checking in everywhere I go. I'm just using the new tool. How could this possibly be used against me? But we are getting closer to the point where all these pieces of the puzzle are being are being put in place. And I tend to talk about technocracy. Who's familiar with that term, technocracy? Most people here. Would it be helpful to give a brief history? Does everybody feel like they know about the technocratic movement or have some idea what that means? Okay. So I talk about technocracy because this was a movement in the US and in Canada in the 1930s and 1940s. It was born out of the broader progressive movement of the 1920s and something called the efficiency movement, oddly enough. That was all about trying to make government more efficient in terms of using what they called at the time machines, which I think we would probably call AI today. But in the 1930s and 1940s, this movement started to blossom across the US and Canada. There was a man named Walter Scott. I have several documentaries of this, actually. And actually, right here, Becca, raise your hand. This is, who's seen The Pyramid of Power? My documentary series. This is one of the amazing editors I've worked with. And if you've seen my documentary about Peter Thiel, Donald Trump, that came out a couple months ago, she did all that work as well there. So, but we have the 13th episode of The Pyramid of Power is called The Technocratic State. So what I'm summarizing briefly here, you can find at thepyramidofpower.net. And basically this movement, it had its moment. Like at one point there was a massive technocrat parade in New York City. They had organizations and clubs popping up all over the country. And what made them different from other political movements, technocracy, right? So democracy, the people, rule by the people. This is ruled by the technocrats. And they said the technocrats would be the engineers, the experts, the scientific and technological elite. They said that the people are too dumb, basically, to know what's good for them. We need to remove the voting and, sort of representative government, but also the business capitalist class, it doesn't know how to run things either. So you take those out of the equation, and instead you put these experts, these engineers at the top. And like I said, at the time in the 1930s, they didn't have the terminology artificial intelligence, so they said the technocrat king, or the head of the technate, would be running these machines. And at the time they were talking about ideas like energy certificates. Like most movements of the time, they promised it would be a utopia. They did also acknowledge it might involve some loss of individual freedoms and privacy to get to this world, but I promise once we get there, it's going to be a utopia, it's going to be great. And it did have a pretty popular moment in history. In fact, some of you may know that Elon Musk's grandfather was involved, Joshua Hadelman. He was involved in Canada with the party there. So there's a whole interesting history there that I encourage you to look more into. Because what I believe, and what I write about in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, is that movement, while it seemingly died down and disappeared, it actually has continued to guide what I call the predator class, the ruling class, since that time. In the 1970s, there was another book called America Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era, which was written by a man named Zbigniew Brzezinski. I'm just throwing out some names for those who know. If not, look these references up. Zbigniew Brzezinski was a long-term advisor, presidential advisor from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama. He helped found the Trilateral Commission, just a general, what you might call a deep state agent. This guy, in his book, also acknowledged that to have this technotronic world, you would probably have to have some type of police state, because people would not voluntarily necessarily move in this direction. But again, he promised using technology, you could achieve this, and it would ultimately be a utopia in their minds. I still believe that this ideology is what's guiding many of the people today. And the technocrats of 2025 are people like Elon Musk, you could say Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, others, right? These are people that have enough money, wealth, and influence that they don't need to be elected into any governmental position to affect and impact your lives. Like, they can cause dips and changes in the stock market. Bill Gates and others trying to figure out how to, they're putting money into geoengineering, learning how to work with climate manipulation, things like that, right? So not elected, nobody voted for him, nobody asked for this, but they have such wealth and influence, they can essentially achieve it either way. These are the technocrats of today. And I don't think they're the top of the pyramid, so to speak, but they're definitely the representatives of this. Others would point to people like Klaus Schwab, who a lot of people were paying attention to at the World Economic Forum during COVID. And there are others we could go on. But the point is, this is sort of the world that they're trying to build. The way you get there, digital IDs, facial recognition. How do they achieve it? We saw some of the steps during COVID. Like I said, look at the tactics they used. Lockdowns, financial exclusion. I'll give an example from the way they used it in China. The activists, after being sick of, I think it was 2 to 3 years of the zero COVID policy, where people were literally being welded into their homes in parts of China and like completely locked down, one of the worst parts of the world. When activists finally started resisting and organizing, they already have this app that you guys might have heard of, WeChat, And it's like the everything in one app, which Elon Musk talks about making his Twitter X into, the everything in one app, where it's banking, health information, etc. I call this the one app to rule them all, right? They've got everybody on that, and again, probably sold to people is it's super convenient. Why should you have a healthcare app and a banking app and this? Just put them all into one. We promise it'll be great. And that app is one of the many ways they're able to control people, in addition to the facial recognition cameras everywhere, but it's the digital ID component of it. So when these activists started to try to organize protests against the zero COVID policy, they used social media to the best they could, but by the time they tried to go get on the train or the buses to get to wherever they were holding the protest, their IDs had been turned off. Because you have to have an ID to get on any public transportation. And so since the government found out, hey, these are the people organizing it, let's just turn them off. So when they go up to get on the bus, they scan their thing. What did they say in Idiocracy? Invalid, or what is the thing? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, unscannable. Unscannable. But that's one simple way for them to turn people off. There's many other ways. I mean, again, I said we saw it with the banking. We can see it in other areas. And that is a potential future. I want to also point to two other areas. Last year, we went to the UK and went to Denmark to do some events. Denmark is a beautiful country with a lot of amazing activists, and I sat in a room with people as much as you guys here having the same conversation, and one of them said, Derrick, we already have a digital ID here. It's called My ID, and you can't get insurance without it, you can't get a bank account with it, you can't get on public transportation without it. It's not mandatory, but try to function without it, and it's pretty difficult. Thankfully, though, even in that sort of like, when we were there, my partner Miriam and I were just like, hell no, we can never let it get this far. Like, you know, these are cool people, but no, I'm not staying here, I'm not living here. But even in that space, they were still planning. I'm like, what are we going to do? And there was somebody in the room who said, oh, I found creative ways to avoid it. And some people we met who are building eco-villages and intentional communities out of the city, you know, getting out of Copenhagen and trying to kind of be more rural and trying to survive outside of those systems as much as they can. In the UK, when we arrived to the UK, facial recognition, of course, was there, and I had kind of prepped. We were traveling with myself, Miriam, and both of our parents, so I'd kind of prepped my family. They know what my work is about and everything, but I was like, guys, we're going to say no to the facial recognition when we get there, okay? Just follow my lead. I promise it's going to be okay. We're going to be good. And it was like 6 of us, and we walked past the Border Patrol guy, and then I was like, okay, here it is, and we're going to go this way. And so I told the lady, no, thank you, we just want to do the traditional thing, which is totally legal, and it's, you know, it's your right to do and all that stuff. But this officer, I think he just got like his ego hurt or triggered or something. He's like, wait, hold on, what's going on? I was like, we're just going to do the traditional passport thing. He's like, no. And all of a sudden it became a freaking 5-hour ordeal of them like holding my mom, Miriam's mom, her sister, going through all of our bags, pulling out every one of my mom's cards. How much money do you have on this one? Who paid for the Airbnb? Who did this? And I was kind of like, in my mind, I'm like, they're like, where are you going? What are you doing here? I'm like, we're here on vacation, which was true. We also had an event we were going to. And once they found out about that event, he's just like, oh, so you're trying to keep things from me. And I said, you know what? I'm from the U.S. and technically, like, this is just none of your business. He's like, you're not in America anymore, and you know, just did that whole game for a while, and then eventually he starts looking up my website, and he keeps letting me sit down and comes back and asks me more questions. Are you one of these people who think pedophiles run the government? And I said, well, if you want to get into that, and he's like, I'm not trying to get conspiratorial. I was like, well, you asked me. I'm just trying to give you an answer here. But so he's clearly going through my website and going through everything. And then eventually they bring out 2 counterterrorism officers. Like, you know, these are like the suits. Because this guy was young, like I said, he had very little power, but he had the power to at least make our day miserable. You know, my family, everybody's hungry, and at one point they took my sister-in-law to the other room by herself, and we were just like, what are they doing to her? You know, it was just a horrible ordeal. And my family just saw him like, look, we didn't do anything wrong. I know this sucks, guys. I'm sorry. Maybe you want to blame me. I was like, but we literally haven't done anything wrong. And these people are just creating a problem out of nowhere. So anyways, after the counterterrorism officers came and asked me some questions, they left, and the guy came back with our passports, and he's like, follow me. He didn't even want to like acknowledge us until he like took us across the literal line. I guess now you're officially in the UK. And he's like, we have insufficient evidence to prevent you from entering the country. Have a nice trip. We'll be watching you. And literally said he was going to follow us, like, because they asked me at that point of what's your itinerary, where are you going for every day or whatever. My point is, those things are already happening. This is rolling out. We're not talking about some distant time. When I first wrote How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, it was 2019. I published it January 2020, right before COVID. It has nothing to do with COVID, you know, particularly. It's just that I could see we were headed towards this place. And COVID, I think, was one of the first major examples of us seeing these forms of digital technology, whether it's the contact tracing apps and things like that, being used. And that really, all that stuff, vaccine passports, was really just the first gateway to getting people comfortable with digital IDs. I mean, that's really what it was. And as I said, we can look to other nations to see how this can be used problematically. I'm sure people can come up with different reasons why they think it's useful, convenient, et cetera, et cetera. I personally think that once we start, going over to that side, you start compromising your freedom, your liberty for security. We all know where that goes, right? It doesn't end up in a good place. And personally, I still very much care about privacy. I know we're living in a time where most people don't think privacy is important, but these two things, historically, if you study revolutionary movements and civil wars and totalitarian governments, privacy and liberty are intertwined. If you lose one, you're going to lose the other. If we start losing privacy, it becomes very easy. If we're not free in our own minds, our own hearts, it becomes a lot easier to control the population. And technology can be a way that really makes this a lot easier. So when I was writing the book in 2020, I was kind of anticipating what might come in writing, like how is a person like me, and I think most of you here, who cares about privacy and liberty, how are we going to stay free, and not just free, but like thriving, the lives we want. Like I said, think about what your 2030 looks like. How do we get there when this world is being built up pretty rapidly around us, Well, COVID happened right after I wrote the book, and then I did a second edition to it in 2022 based on everything we learned from the lockdowns, from the travel restrictions. Actually, when I did my tour and I came here to Portland, I traveled around the U.S., I heard from so many people, just like Danny was sharing earlier, this became like an underground spot for people to connect. And I heard from so many people around the country who said, oh, we're using the freedomcells.org website, or we're using, what other apps, or just Facebook groups, finding ways to connect to each other despite government lockdowns and restrictions, right? And so the second edition of my book is very much sourced from my own ideas, but as well as people that I met and said, here's how we avoided lockdowns. Here's how we got around the travel restrictions. There became a whole black and gray market for fake PCR tests and for, I heard a rumor about this. I wouldn't know anything personally about it, but allegedly, there was a lot of fake PCR tests being passed around to allow people to continue to travel. And just think about that, guys. This is just like, this is a couple years ago. And something like that could happen again. Those sorts of measures could come back. It might not come because of a pandemic, and whatever your thoughts are on that, the point is that event was used to advance these causes. It could come in the form of, people are talking about cyber pandemics. The government's been warning about that for years, claiming that somebody's going to do it. They'll probably just do it themselves and then tell us they did it. But so whatever it is, the point is that governments will always use crises. There's that quote from Rahm Emanuel, from former Chicago mayor, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. Like that's sort of the operating system. Some people call that disaster capitalism, or just this idea that whether they manufacture events or they simply take advantage of them, the end result ends up being the same. That things like surveillance, loss of liberties and privacies and freedoms advance. And, it's very hard to get those things back. So I started to brainstorm, and from my own life as well. I mean, I'm not here to pitch you guys any kind of 5-step program that's going to fix all your problems, because no such thing exists. Anybody trying to sell you that is probably BSing you. But I can speak from experience that I haven't used banks since 2008, that I've been driving since 2008 without a driver's license. I'm not a sovereign citizen. I don't file any paperwork. I don't have any, I just live free. These, I have like Jedi stuff going on, It's like, a cop sees me, I'm like, these are not the droids you're looking for. I just try to live as free as possible and stay out of these systems. I don't have a cell phone. These are just personal choices I've made. I'm not saying any of this is easy by any means, especially if you're the kind of person that's very plugged in, like I am. You probably see me with my laptop everywhere I go, so it's sometimes a little more obnoxious. But the point is I've tried to live a life that allowed me to do the things I want, to cultivate that I want, including the wealth. I'm not saying that like abandon everything and go live in the woods. That might be the path for some people, but I do think there is a way for us to have the lives and the comfort that we're used to in the future. But we need to start thinking about the ways we're dependent on the systems they're building. If all of your money is in a 401k right now, or in stocks, or if you've got $10,000 plus of credit card debt or student loan debt, like these are the type of things that could be used against you in the future. These are the kind of things that could get you squeezed later. If you have all of your money in the bank, and again, nothing I'm saying here again is a judgment on anyone. This is just the facts of life. But who here is using like Bank of America, Chase, generally like the mainstream banks? It's okay, nobody's judging you. Most people, right? Most people. That is something that we can take a step right now and choose to exit from and choose to support better systems, right? Some of the things that I'm offering are things that can happen in a moment's notice. They're not big things you need to prepare for. That might take some time if you want to unplug from the banks. In my book, I talk about that, like creating a 6-month plan. Like, let's say you've got all this direct deposit, all these different things, and you got to untangle that. I get that. But for me personally, it's worth whatever struggle or effort that might be required to live in line with my values. The freaking big banks, all of them, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, all of them were involved with the financial crisis and robbing the American people. Chase Bank helped launder money for Jeffrey Epstein and his victims. Like, why would we want to support these kind of systems? But when you give them your money, because of the way fractional reserve banking works, they can take your money, invest it in all kinds of things that you have no say in. And not only just the general principle of, like, kind of supporting those institutions. Again, not a judgment on anybody, but for me, that's something that does matter. And essentially what I talk about, I call it exit and build. It's like taking the idea of voting with your dollar, but applying it in a holistic way to as many areas of your life as possible, right? So when we talk about voting with your dollar, it's things like, okay, you don't like Monsanto, glyphosate, so you don't buy Roundup, right? You don't support that company. You don't hold stocks in them. You go out of your way to avoid that. And you could probably think of other companies or corporations or things you might personally try to avoid and things like that. That's voting with your dollar. We all understand it in that concept. But if you apply that to the banking system, you start applying that to the place you get your food, where you get your food, and what you support. Obviously, here you guys have some better options than people in other parts of the country as far as supporting smaller businesses. So taking that idea and basically applying it as radically as you can. So unplugging from those systems before it becomes too late, because essentially what I fear is that if we continue to have these conversations and you continue to watch the podcasts and the documentaries and read all the Substack articles and watch all the stuff on Instagram and TikTok and wherever else, and we just watch the world get worse, but we don't actually do anything about it, well, why should we be surprised if we wake up tomorrow and then all of your money has become a central bank digital currency or a stable coin, or you no longer have the option to opt out? We're in a very tight window right now that seems like there's still time to focus on building parallel systems, alternative systems in these different areas, and I'm going to give some more examples. But if we don't act, then we know it's coming, right? I mean, we're on a train and we can see there's a train wreck coming up ahead. We might all have different views and theories on what exactly that means, right? But we just generally know things are not headed in a direction we're satisfied with and we're excited about. And we would be foolish to just, okay, well, it's coming, but I'm just going to keep posting on the internet. Maybe that'll do something about it. Or I'll just keep ignoring it. Or I'll just hope somebody else takes care of it. Because that's what most of us have been taught, that somebody else is going to take care of our problems. Whether that's false heroes in politics like Donald Trump and other people, any other politician you want to name, Elon Musk, etc. Those people aren't going to come save us. There is no person riding on the white horse to save us. This is truly, I believe, the time in history where humanity has to step up and claim our own personal sovereignty, our own self-ownership, and then recognize that in each other. So if I say that I'm a free, powerful, beautiful person, and everything that entails, that means that I have the right to make my own choices, to live freely, but I also have to respect that right about you, right? I can't come use force, violence, or fraud against you and make you live the way I want. I have to see that you're a powerful, free, beautiful person too, right? If we could just start from that foundational standpoint and then start recognizing we don't want these different systems. I don't want that 2030, but now we're putting all of our energy into the 2030 we do want, and now we're creating that. And that's going to look different city to city, state to state, country to country. But I know that if we focus on that, essentially exiting, but then the build part, building parallel systems, I think that's the solution. I don't think politics is going to save us. If you feel like politics is part of your tool belt, focus as locally as possible. That would be my advice. I ran for mayor twice in Houston, where I'm from, so that I could get access to radio, so I could get access to TV, so I could get access to high schools and old folks' homes and Republican groups and Democrat groups, just to use it as a soapbox. Not because I believe that somehow I was going to save the system and fix it all. I don't think it can be necessarily. But I used it strategically to try to reach people. But overall, I don't think politics is the answer. I also know that violence isn't the answer. Burning whatever government building, while it might feel good for a little while, isn't going to get us wherever we want to be, or those kind of things. Whether you think it's storming the Capitol or burning a car or whatever, like the sort of extreme end of let's do some insurrectionary violence, that doesn't get us anywhere. In fact, we're trying to step out of that cycle, right? Like in Buddhism, it's called samsara, the cycle of life and death. Well, you look at the root and the word revolution, right? That key word revolve, right? We're going in circles. We need to step out of that. And historically, study revolutions. I'm not an expert, but I've definitely studied as much as I can, trying to understand the motivations and try to understand what failed in different historical revolutions, the Spanish Revolution, Mexican Revolution, Russian, etc. And many, many times, people who believe that they're fighting for a just cause end up becoming the very thing that they're fighting, because they give into this idea that violence is going to get us there. And then once you use that violence, then you have to defend the revolution against the counter-revolutionaries. And the next thing you know, you're the same thing you were opposing. So I don't think violence is going to get us to where we want to go either. And so if you eliminate politics, if you eliminate violence, also we got to throw out apathy. Apathy's not getting us anywhere either. And that's, I think, where sometimes people, who's heard that term black-pilled floating around on the internet, or doomer, or things like that, right? This is kind of becoming more popular because I think as we accept the realities that we're discussing tonight, people do come away feeling hopeless. How many people watch podcasts and you feel worse afterwards? Why are you doing that to yourself? I mean, obviously there's a certain level of being informed. That's my job as a journalist, to try to do the same thing and share information with you. But as I said earlier, there's also people who are profiting off that and who don't really care to provide you any solutions, don't care about solutions because they're just making a living, chilling, and telling you the news you could read on your own in 15-minute little clickbait videos. And it doesn't always make you feel empowered. I'm not saying we need to blow smoke up each other's butts and say the world's perfect and everything's going to get taken care of, but I do believe there are solutions, and they come from pulling away our power from those systems. So let's go into exit and build a little more. Exit and build. This idea is essentially exiting from systems that do not align with your values and principles, what I call slavery systems, or the coming slavery systems. Exiting from those systems, so like the banking system, we're going to talk about digital technology briefly, the unsustainable, wasteful food production and distribution systems, the healthcare system, we could go on, right? So pulling out from those systems that don't apply and align with your values, and then focus on the creation of alternative, parallel systems to that, right? There's that Buckminster Fuller quote many people are familiar with, the idea of, you don't change the system by fighting it, you have to build something new, right? So that's what I'm focused on, is how do we take our energy, time, money, energy, mental, physical, spiritual support from those systems and put our energy into the creation of new systems. And in some ways this is easier said than done. So I talked about the banking system, right? One simple solution that does take time, depending on how plugged in you are, would be to just quit the big bank and join a local credit union, right? That's like one step in the direction. And think of this as a process too, right? This is why what I said earlier about envisioning what your 2030 looks like, right? So let's say your 2030, I'll just share mine. My 2030 is living on the land that we have in Mexico. We just paid it off a couple months ago. Having our home there. Thank you guys. There's clean water. There's free-range kids running around. There's clean organic food forests. We're hosting a workshop teaching people how to build their own natural buildings. We're having instructors come in and doing different types of healing modalities, all kinds of fun stuff, right? And it's a workspace, it's a village, it's an education space to teach other people, to activate them and send them home. That's the 2030 vision I'm working on. I guarantee you guys, I'm going to get it. There's nothing else that's standing in the way of that. I'm going to achieve that. And I want you to achieve your 2030. Thank you. But it's because I've spent years and years. I first wrote about this in a book in 2017, this idea of the Conscious Agora, which is the name of our eco-village, back in 2017. And I had no idea where it was going to be at, how I was going to get the money, what was going to happen. It's just this is where I need to head. 2020 came around and we got the greatest gift ever, COVID-1984, and it just put a little encouragement hey, maybe this project I've thought in the future, maybe now I should start doing it, right? And I think whether your vision is what I have or something else, whether it's getting land or just staying in the city, but still sticking to your values, you need to start putting time and energy into that. So this is something that I'm working on, a constant process, day to day. How do I move myself closer to that goal? So let's say your goal is, I would like to be unplugged from the banking system. But currently, I've got 20 different direct deposits going on. I've got this thing happening on. It's going to take me a little time to untangle that, right? So you just come up with a plan. You're okay, this week I can start with these things. These are really easy. In fact, I don't need to pay for that anymore. Let me just end that, right? You start making this process. It's not about going from where you are now to totally out of the matrix, so to speak, overnight. It's a process, and it does take time, and it takes energy, and it takes effort. And this is what I was saying earlier. I'm not selling you any sort of quick fix ideas. I think that, in fact, it's going to be probably very difficult to maintain our freedom and privacy in the coming years. And that if we're not willing to be adaptable and to maybe make some changes, whether that's lifestyles or habits or whatever, then it's going to be difficult, right? And ultimately, each of you will have to decide that. For example, I mentioned facial recognition. That's a red line in the sand for me. If and when it does become mandatory, I won't be flying anymore. In between now and then, I'm not trying to accept it. I'm opting out every time I can. I'm trying to tell other people, and I hope that we can, build some sort of movement that people, kind of, like back in the day, 2010, 11, there was a lot of resistance to the body scanners when they first came out. It became like a national thing, like a national opt-out day. But with facial recognition, there's not really any organized resistance to it, and I'm hoping to change that soon. But if that doesn't happen, I'm not just going to say, well, I've been warning people about this for years. Oh, well, I'll just do it anyways, right? Who cares? It's not actually principles I want to live by. It's just words I say. But that's not how I operate. We have to, I think, find those things that you do care about, and what is that red line in the sand for you? Maybe that's not a line for you, and that's okay. It's going to be different for each person. Like I said, I don't use a phone. Maybe that sounds extreme for some of you. It's up to you to decide how you are going to relate to these different forms of technology. Are you going to accept the digital ID? Some people during COVID were already tested, right? You already sort of found out. Do you want to keep your job? Did anybody here lose a job for their choices or choices they chose not to make? A few people here. Did anybody lose friends or family for choices they chose not to make? Yeah, a lot of us, right? So that's the social aspect. That's where the social engineering I was talking about coming in, right? I'll just give another brief example about that. The social credit score aspect. This is the way that they can socially engineer compliance from people using social credit scores, which is like a credit score that's about your financial value and your worth. This is about your social worth. So if you're one of those crazy people who is posting about horse paste on the internet all the time, your score would probably be kind of low. Or if you're one of these crazy people that insist on coming to events like this, your score would probably be low, right? And at first it's like, oh, who cares? Some silly internet number, right? Until those things get connected. And then you realize that your score actually affects your ability to get that new promotion you've been trying to get. Or your score affects your ability to use public transportation. This is happening in parts of China and other nations that are implementing social credit scores. So think about this. Let's play this out in our minds. You got a good friend. You're a very vocal person. Maybe you're an activist, like I said. You're posting about these things. And it's not only your score that will go down, it's the people that associate with you. Their score can go down as well. And so then, eventually, my friend who loves me so much says, look, I care about you, but I have this really important, promotion I'm trying to go for coming up, and I need a score of at least 600. And if I keep hanging out with you, my score is going to go down, so I'll see you in 6 months. I love you, but I got to, distance myself from you. Little things like that are very subtle, but that's one way to squeeze people. Again, there's no gun in the room. It's just using the technology to pressure people into compliance. And those things are going to, I think, rear their heads more and more. So exiting a building from the banking system might be that you come up with a plan to switch over to a local credit union. For those who are interested in going beyond that, there's things like gift economy, barter some people are into. There's also private cryptos. I don't really support Bitcoin these days anymore and things like that, but I do think Monero, which is a private crypto that at least has allowed and helped me avoid certain institutions and banks for the last few years, is a tool. One thing, as I said earlier, is to be adaptable. A tool that works today might not work in a year. Things might change because that's the world that we're living in. I mean, the predictions for how rapidly AI is going to change our world in the coming years are very fast. Like in the next 5 years, the world is going to be vastly different in terms of it just being incorporated everywhere, which is already happening more and more, right? So we have to prepare for these rapid changes, and I think that's why you have to be adaptable. So you exit and build from the banking system. You get into a credit union. Then maybe you're willing to look into Monero or something like that. Or maybe you're focused on other things, like I said, like gift networks, gift economies, alternative systems of exchange. At one point we had set up a local market in Houston where it was just different vendors, artists, food, all kinds of stuff, and everybody there was willing to take cash, silver, because there was some people into precious metals, and then whatever else you want to come on with. Where we live in Mexico, there's a currency that is only in Mexico. It's called the tumen, and they don't even really call it a currency to kind of stay out of, stay a little less visible. They just say it's a game, but this game is spreading around parts of Mexico where different communities are starting to accept the tumen, and they actually create a physical paper for it, and they have a whole way to go about it. My point is these systems can exist. You might not be the one to build it, but learn about these. Look for the people who are thinking in these ways and support them. That's the other thing, right? Exit and build. In some ways, we're not going to be the builders because maybe it's beyond our knowledge set, so support those who are working on that. One example I'll give is the technology side of things. The tech side is huge. We could talk all night about it, but I just want to throw out a few few solutions here. Who got here on Google Maps? Or Apple Maps? It's okay. We just probably everybody. And that's understandable, right? Because these companies have monopolized everything, right? You can't go to the local electronics store and find a Linux-based computer, or companies that do exist now that are creating de-Googled phones and privacy-based services. So I'm going to name a couple of different sites to check out if you want to go down this road. Because again, this is one that, while it can be overwhelming, you could stop using Google right now and start using presearch.org, or start using SeerX, or some of these others that exist. You could stop using Google Maps and look into other alternatives like Organic Maps or Magic Earth, right? But are you going to be able to find them on the App Store that you're using right now? That's a whole other question, right? Because Apple, they control these stores and they can control what gets on there, which is sort of an example of the whole system, right? We've just accepted, for those of you who use Apple products, that this is the store, they control it, they can take apps off that they want, but it's because we're voluntarily choosing to use them, right? So if you play by their games, they're going to set the rules, right? But there do exist alternatives. So my buddy Hakeem Anwar, he actually has a company called AbovePhone.com. And I don't have a phone, but my partner Miriam does, and so that's the one she uses. And when we travel, like when we did some touring recently, we use Magic Earth to travel. We don't use Google. And like a lot of these projects, when they're open source, they kind of start out a little bit rough, and you got to give them a little grace period. But it's come a long way. Now it's like just as simple and easy as using anything Google. And that's kind of another like meta point, I think. Think about the fact that we're so used to Google Maps that it's become, and just Google in general, it's become a verb, right? Just Google it. You don't say search it, you just say Google it. But also, even just looking at a map different than Google Maps or Apple Maps, it's like your brain doesn't know how to make sense of it because we're so used to just that. That's how much like influence they have in our lives, right? So there's a little bit of unlearning you have to do, and there's learning curves for these new tools, but they exist. So Miriam uses the phone. When she wants to watch YouTube, she uses the NewPipe app, which connects everything that has YouTube on there, but there's no logging of traffic. There's no needing to log in. She likes to listen to podcasts, and on the phone they have the AntennaPod. It's a open source app that allows you to listen to everything that's on Spotify, on Apple, etc., without an account, and you can actually download, because the subscription-based service is also part of the you will own nothing and be happy mentality. Because think about it, we used to own physical media, CDs, DVDs, records, whatever, even just downloading music to your own MP3 player or something like that. Now we're just like, no, it'll just be on Spotify whenever I want, or be on Netflix or whatever. But they can take those things down, and they do. They took down certain artists during COVID. They took down different people. So it's just another way that we've kind of bought into that subscription-based model. You're going to pay for it forever instead of actually buying it. But there are some artists that still, if you have an opportunity to use a website like Bandcamp or something and pay an artist directly, pay them, support the artist directly. Don't go through Spotify. My point is, all these tools exist out there, but you're not going to hear about them at the local electronics store. Most people don't know, because Google, Microsoft, Meta, etc., have monopolized that marketplace. So at Above Phone, they sell phones, they sell laptops. There's a banner on my website at theconsciousresistance.com if you guys want to learn more. I think there's like a discount code through that, just in case anybody wants to get something. But the point is, they also offer a lot of different resources. Hakeem has another website called takebackourtech.org, and it has really simple guides, written and visual guides, on how to switch over to Linux, how to learn more about encrypted messaging apps, like learning how to use VPNs, just really basic but useful tools. And this doesn't mean these tools are going to protect you from every type of hacking that exists or that the government or the CIA has access to. But if we're not even trying to protect our privacy, and we're just giving up, and we're just like, well, whatever, they got everything, I'm not even going to bother, then we shouldn't expect anything but privacy to disappear. So why not at least try to make a little bit of a stand, right? A couple other websites on that front as far as tech: privacytools.io, and nomoregoogle.com. And these are literally just so you use Gmail, and it'll say, here's a bunch of alternatives. Again, do your own research. I don't get paid by these companies. I'm not vouching for all of them, but there are alternatives that do exist. So when it comes to Google Documents, I use a service called CryptPad. CryptPad.fr is the one I use. CryptPad has documents, it has sheets, it has forms, it has all the things you're used to doing with Google or Microsoft, but it's encrypted, it's open source, it's not going to be stealing your data, etc. So again, voting with your dollar. Why not actually try to support the companies that are trying to offer these alternative services to us, and then tell other people about it, so that more of us can exit from these systems and try to build new ones. And this is what I was saying, like, I'm not a software engineer, I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer, so I don't know how to build these tools. When I meet somebody who's working on them, I try to do my best to like shout it from the rooftops. Like, hey guys, this person, like I had a guy build an alternative to Spotify. And it's out there. I don't know how much longer it'll last because unfortunately these beautiful tools, when they don't get support, there's only so long they can sustain themselves if nobody's using them, if nobody even knows they exist. So try to support those who are building those alternatives. So finance, technology, food is another big one. The goal here is to take this exit and build idea, and when you do this, imagining your 2030, I also encourage you to do what I call a holistic self-assessment. Use COVID as the sort of starting point. Look at the different areas of your life and see what are the weakest points right now. It could be what I said, that you're in debt right now, or that you're totally dependent on the grocery store for all your food. Well, one step, and just to use that example, would be learn about the farmers that are in your area. Go to the local farmers markets, make relationships with them, go visit their farms. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a farmer or a permaculturist. I think that's a valuable skill, but that's not going to be everybody's role. But at least have those relationships. For example, during COVID, we saw how important that was, right? They started shutting down farmers markets in some place and keeping people from accessing the fresh, clean food that you would think somebody would need during an alleged pandemic. So for us, we started to go visit our favorite farm stands and fruit stands and get their numbers and say, hey, if they shut down, we will come to your house directly. We'll meet you in the back alley to buy your fruit if we have to. Underground black market fruit deals. And having those relationships was extremely important. And so maybe you can also, you learn that there's a local community garden or an urban farm. Put an hour in. Again, I'm not saying you need to turn into a farmer, but know something about the soil. Get connected to it. My other grandmother, who was like I said, my one grandma was a really big spiritual influence when I was locked up. My other grandma, she has a farm in Kentucky. She's 85 years old. She's been, growing her own food since I was a little kid. And when I started waking up, she kind of patted me on the head. And she's like, welcome to the club, welcome to the club. But, grandma told me, when I started to get into gardening stuff, she was the first person to tell me, she's like, Derrick, the more you work with the soil, you're going to get closer to God. And she's like, and I'm not talking about religion, something else. And I remember telling her, this was 2011, I was like, Grandma, I think that's already happening. I'm on the beginning of some really cool journey right now. And so that's increasingly important to have your access to fresh, clean food. We saw during COVID certain places, again, diversity of opinions here. Some people didn't want to have to wear a mask to go get their groceries, right? Maybe some of you were okay with that. Other places started asking for PCR tests. What up, brother? Other people started asking for proof of getting a vaccination, right? I know there's a diversity of opinions, but for me personally, I think it's my body, my choice, and I'm not going to tell anybody if I don't have to, right? And I shouldn't have to show proof of that to get into a grocery store. Those sorts of things could happen again, but it could be show us your digital ID to get in the grocery store. It could be things like that. There's an importance to not being dependent on these unsustainable, wasteful food production and distribution systems. My bigger vision and picture is localized, decentralized food production as much as possible. We need more community farms, more urban gardens, etc. And the people who are doing that work are really heroes, and we need more of that. So I could go on, but I think you guys are getting the point here about what Exit and Build is at. And I don't think I've said this yet, but the book that all of this is coming from, you can download for free. I was supposed to have copies tonight, but they're not going to get here till Friday. So we'll have to get those later. But you can download it for free at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. There's a free audio book. There's a free PDF. It's available in Spanish, English, German, and French. And it's been my most popular book because I think people are ready for solutions, right? Most of you came here tonight because you already know things are headed in a not so good direction. But we're trying to ask ourselves, well, what am I actually going to do about it, right? And ultimately, I kind of made a joke earlier, but what's your name, brother?
I'm Shoko.
Shoko?
Yeah.
This brother right here is the future, right? And who else has children here that are not here tonight? And I have 6 nieces and nephews that I'm spending a lot of time with this summer, and they literally are my daily motivation for this. I think it's important for us to recognize that the world that the coming generations are being born into is 100% dependent on what we do or do not do today. All of you clearly came here for one reason or another because you suspect things are going in a not so great direction. So that's step one. You're awake, you're concerned, you're curious, you're aware, whatever words you want to use, you're conscious. But I don't think that's enough. We need to be what I consider activated, actively working on what comes next, right? It's one thing to recognize there's a problem. It's a whole other thing to say, what am I actually going to do about it? And how am I going to take responsibility for my own life? But not only my life, but the people coming after me, right? Their lives and the world that they inherit is 100% dependent on what we do. So we have the 7 generations after us that are counting on us to step up and act. And I do believe this is humanity's moment for us to decide which way things go. And also take strength and take solace from the fact that you have 7 generations of your ancestors behind you as well. You know, no matter what your skin color, place of birth, language, etc., each and every one of us were born here on this planet, and our ancestors had to go through blood, sweat, and tears to get us here, to be alive in these moments. You know, just think about that. All that struggle and all that effort that went into us being able to have the lives we have, even with all of our problems, even with all the things we're trying to fix. You know, there's something powerful about that. So when I take on this struggle, I really think about that. I think about who's coming after me and what am I leaving for them and what are my actions or inaction going to leave for them. And also I know that I have my ancestors at my back that are standing with me and that they are counting on us to continue this legacy to build a better world. And that's what I really think we should focus our energy on. Not focusing on fighting each other on the internet and being right, letting our egos rise. And I say this as somebody who is guilty of getting out there. And if you see me on Twitter, it's not always a pretty sight. I can talk shit with the best of them. I let it get to me just like anybody else. But ultimately, I try to pull back, you know, and realize, like, look, is this serving me to just call this person a dumbass today? Is that going to help anything? Or is that just going to feel good? Maybe both, right? Maybe not. But really try to center myself and like, okay, I started this as an activist, completely naive and green and like, all right, it's going to take a couple years, but we're going to change the world. Everything's, you know, we just got to tell everybody and they'll figure it out, and then the world, and then, you know, over time, like, okay, maybe it's going to take a little more time, right? But that same desire to change the world, starting with myself and to help other people, is there. That's the root of why I even bother to do talks like this, to write books or do anything, to connect with people like you. Because I do want to see a positive end result. And I know you guys all want that as well, right? We're not just here stroking, patting ourselves on the back like we're so enlightened, we got it figured out. It's going to take effort and work. So I just want to invite you guys, again, spend some time thinking about what your 2030 looks like. Put some effort and some energy into that. Spend some time thinking about doing this sort of self-assessment, this holistic self-assessment. That's actually a title of a book I wrote about this, which is also available for free on my website. It's called The Holistic Self-Assessment, and it's the process I took myself through when I was in prison, of getting to know myself better, understanding my principles, understanding my values and my goals. Whether you do that whole process or not, just look at your life and try to understand the areas that you might be able to strengthen, right? Like I said, if you've got a bunch of debt, maybe start coming up with a plan how to manage that. If you want to switch out of the big banks, start coming up with a 6-month plan or a 1-month plan. Put action into it. Work on these things on a regular basis. I actually put together a free 45-day exit and build challenge that you can use on my website. It's 7 weeks, and each week we go through one of these things. We go through technology, we go through food, etc. And we go through, here's the problems, here's the solutions, here's some homework. And I promise you, if you actually take this thing seriously and you use it over 45 days and then just continue on with it, you're going to start to see change in your life. Like, it's not something I can do, it's something you have to do. And I'm sure you'll have even pieces of the puzzle that I haven't thought of. But I did this around the election last year to sort of invite people to say, hey, look, if you're going to go vote in the most important election of our lifetimes, great, do that, but also maybe consider trying these strategies too and see which one, you know, works out better for you. What's that saying, like shit in one hand and do something in the other? It's kind of how I felt like. I was like, go vote in one hand and then try exit and build and see which one actually helps. Because, again, I don't think politics is going to get us there. So we have to put our energy then into what might actually help. And for me, that is the creation of these parallel systems outside of the mainstream, building something new. I don't know what it looks like. I can't, describe exactly how we're going to get there, but I do know it's possible. And maybe even if it's not possible, it still feels like it's probably important enough to put our energy and our time into. So thank you guys for being here tonight. Hey, Brother Kenny, can you come take a picture of this beautiful crowd with me real quick? I want just a couple other things before we start dispersing. We're going to do 2 more things. I want to end with my affirmation with you guys, if we could. And do you guys have time for a couple of the songs? Yeah. So for those who don't know, I also perform music, and my brother here, Presence, right here, and we have Ben in the house somewhere. Did he walk? Oh, right there, behind the pole. Dub FX right there. We're going to be performing tomorrow night at the Star Theater. And then we're going to Seattle, and these guys are going on to Canada. So if you're going to come back out tomorrow, you can jam with us, hear some conscious music around other like-minded people. But if you're not going to make it tomorrow, we're going to give you a little bit of a taste tonight. So I was just going to do one song, and then me and Presence are going to perform one of our songs together. But before we do that, I always conclude my talks with this positive affirmation that I've been using since I was locked up. It's just something that I would say, it came to me, however, and it was just something that I would use in really tough times when I was locked up. So if you feel inclined, if you resonate with this, please repeat after me. I am powerful.
I am powerful.
Let's do that one again. I am powerful.
I am powerful.
There we go. I am beautiful.
I am beautiful.
And I am free.
I am free.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate y'all. So we're going to do a quick song. If you want to come by and get some shirts, Kenny's going to be over there. Sign up for my email list. And I did want to do a Q&A, but should we do the
Yeah, I mean, this song is definitely, thanks for being here, by the way. This song is definitely along the same wavelength as everything you've been talking about. It's just about, just choosing not to play into systems that we know are destructive to the reality that we live in. So taxation is one of the biggest ones, where people think that they have to do it, but it's really coercion. It's really just a big bluff. It's a giant bluff that everybody is buying into. And a lot of people don't know that 60% of Americans actually don't even file income tax returns. It's a form, it's a confession form. So that's kind of the inspiration for this song, and it's just about, there's a lot of wars going on in the world right now, and this is about how we can withdraw our money back and put our money back into the community and recirculate that wealth around in the community rather than funding wars that we don't believe in. So that's basically what this song's about.
All right, make some noise for Presence. Check this out, everybody.
Taxation, theft, and the government is slavery. We're paying no mind of money to false authority. Because we own the product of our labor and our even creativity. We won't be used for funding war and genocide and heavy weaponry. And taxation theft. I won't be paying no money to fake authority. I will fund no war, no genocide, taxation fair. I'ma keep my money in the community. Taxation. From the day you were born, the system treats you like a commodity, taking their cut, every transaction, every quantity. Tax on what you earn, what you buy, what you sell, what you own, what you inherit. That shit is an atrocity. That don't even include the hidden tax of inflation when they print money and take a luxe vacation. Then they counterfeit a couple stacks of more, spend it on war and corresponding media campaigning. Most people know that it's a wrong to rob their neighbor, but they think that it's a right if we wrote it down on paper. Programs of elite slavery, a racial issue, whites versus blacks. Either way the master get their revenue, either way the subject is you. Until you choose to own yourself and everything you do, you stop being subdued by the coercion of the few and break the bondage and acknowledge your inherent worth too. Yes,
let me see if I can help you grasp what we're saying. Politicians take your money,
more for the slaying.
While our people suffer, the fat cats they ignore. They got money for wars,
but can't feed the poor.
Taxation is theft, and some call it extortion. Involuntary taxation, pro-lifers pay for abortion, while non-smokers pay for tobacco subsidies, and vegans funding animal inequalities. Steal from anti-war activists to pay for violence, and people wonder why the streets are filled with riots. I do not consent, and I will not relent until all my brothers and sisters repent. Yeah, this is our time to reclaim our worth. Together we can have what we deserve. One by one, let's take our money from the banks. Let's see what they do when they got no money for tanks.
We know that taxation, theft, and the government is slavery. And we're paying no mind of money to false authority. Because we own the product of our labor and our divine creativity. And now we won't be used for funding war and genocide and heavy weaponry. Alright, sing this with me. Here we go. A taxation fair. Again. A taxation fair. Taxation is there. Taxation fair. So I'll be paying in the government or corrupt the crooks, you know. Yes, you know. All right, here we go. And now the banks of the river got the flow of the currency. Now all of a sudden, for the first time in history, you can get your currency out at the banks and grow your own. Take ownership of your life force energy. Even back in the days of Rome, they used silver and gold to protect against the parasitic entities. And now I use ancient and modern technology, stacking freshness. Crypto is my philosophy. Survive and prosper straight to the coming apocalyptic collapse. Monero being used to the counter economic attack. Living life like a certain Samuel Abercrombie III, inspired by the agora, the free market's absurd. Ross O'Brien got locked up for just creating one. Countless of the men and women lives ruined and done. For heaven's sake, let us engage in voluntary transactions. No criminal in the middle taking fractions now.
The sickest thing of all is you're playing a role. They ain't just taxing your wallet, they tax your soul. Some turn a blind eye to the crimes they fund. By taking from your wallets, they buy the guns, the bullets and the bombs they keep raining down on the innocent children. Victims go in the ground. I'm praying for the day the atrocities will cease, whether it's the government man or the violent police. We're capable of more, but I know it seems difficult. Better humanity almost seems mythical. Together we have the power to rise above. Reject the hate and division. We can choose love. Let's build a foundation that stands the test of time. This means resist taxes. Don't give them a dime. We can build a world based on morality and consent. The march to the new world order we can prevent.
Oh yes, we know that taxation, death, and the government is slavery. And now we're paying no mind of money to false authority. We know that we own the product of our labor and not even creativity. It won't be used for funding war and genocide and heavy weaponry. Sing it! Taxation free. I won't be paying for a genocide in a Gaza. Taxation free. I won't be paying for a proxy war in the Ukraine. Taxation free. Cause authority comes from ourselves, from within. Taxation free. Taxation. Yeah.
Make some noise for this brother right here.
If it wasn't for Derrick back in the day, I wouldn't be making this music. So big up to Derrick, and thanks for all coming out and showing your support.